Hi Year 3, this is your Thursday comprehension session. I know you've had comprehension earlier on this week with Mrs. Mirza, so today is the one with me, and today's text we are looking at a non-fiction text and it's called From Spawn to Frog, and this is your text, the one that you can see here. If you want to pause the video now to get a photo of that, that's absolutely fine. And then your questions today, I'm going to zoom out for you, are here. You've got 6 questions. So I'll let you sort that out for now. So you can pause the video now if you need to take that. That's absolutely fine. Okay, now I'm going to stop. I'm going to go on to this one. I'm going to zoom in for us. So as I just said, it's a non-fiction piece of information. Can you just pause the video? I'd like you to write down your piece of paper. What do I mean by non-fiction? Non-fiction. Okay. If you said it was information text, then that's fantastic. So when something is fiction, it's a story. So a bit like when you have Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or Cinderella, or some other texts you might be reading at home, or the text that you're looking at in class. Text is sometimes a fiction, and it is a story. It's made up, often got made up characters in it. It's not fact. Non-fiction is fact. So we have facts, so a bit like our non-chronological reports, they were non-fiction, they were facts, they were information, and that's what we're looking at today. So our text is called From Spawn to Frog by Kate Ruttle, and this is all information. Now, non-chronological reports and non-fiction texts often have photos rather than a cartoon picture. This is actually not a photo, but they often do have photos, which is one of the things we look for when we look to see if something is non-chronological. They often have photos. This one doesn't, but we know it's factual. It's also got subheadings, which is another feature of non-fiction text. Okay, I'd like you to pause the video and have a read through this information yourself. Now, it's not a long one, this one. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer for you. It's not a long piece of information today, but I want you to pause it and have a read through this by yourself for me. Okay, there's a few tricky words today. I'm going to read through it for you, so if you follow along, that would be fantastic, and then you can write down any words you're unsure of, and I'll see if I can go over them, or if you can look them up at the end. Frogs lay their eggs in water or wet places. A floating clump of eggs is called frog spawn. The large and slippery mass of eggs is too big to be eaten. This is nature's way of protecting them because smaller clumps of eggs may be eaten by ducks, fish, insects, and other water creatures. The egg begins as a single cell. That's what these little circles are here. These are the eggs. Several thousand are sometimes laid at the same time. It soon becomes surrounded by a jelly-like covering which protects the egg. The cell splits. The single cell in the egg eventually splits into 2. These are 2 split, making 4 cells, and so on. And after a while, there are many cells in the egg. The embryo. The mass of cells in the egg is called an embryo. It will grow into a tadpole. While the embryo develops, it lives off the yolk of the egg. This supplies it with all the food it needs for 21 days. So while the embryo develops, so while the cells are multiplying and it develops into a tadpole inside the egg, the food that it lives off is the yolk of the egg. So a bit like when you crack an egg, the yellow part there is the yolk, that's what it might feed on. The same in these eggs, slightly different obviously, but that's what it is in there. And it supplies it with the food it needs for 21 days until it's able to come out of the egg. So that is our information text. A few tricky words. Got words like clump, frog spawn, it tells you what frog spawn is, a slippery mass. And the reason I'm not telling you what mass means and clump means is because you might need those words a little bit later on. I don't want to give you the answer away straight away. Okay, now in this text, there was a bit of punctuation. This is a piece of punctuation just here. This is nature's way. And there's a piece of punctuation up there. I'd like you to write down on your piece of paper, what piece of punctuation is that? What's it called? It begins with an A. What is it called? And then I'd like you to write down, why do we have it there? Why is there that piece of punctuation there? This is nature's way of protecting them. And then further down, we've also got commas, ducks, comma, fish, comma, insects, and other water creatures. I'd like you to now write down, why do I have a comma after ducks and after fish? And why don't I have a comma after insects? So I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to start with that. Just focusing on punctuation. Why have we got this punctuation here and what's it called? And why do we have commas after ducks, fish, but not insects? Okay, fantastic. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the first few questions. And remember, our Thursday comprehension lesson, I work through some of the questions with you, but then tomorrow's one is more independent. So let's have a look at the questions for today. Okay, now looking at my marks, all of my marks today, they're all just 1 mark. So hopefully there won't be too tricky questions. So my first question is, what is frog spawn? What is frog spawn? So I'm going to go back up and we're going to have a look at frog spawn. Now, hopefully you'll remember, like I said before, and I've said most weeks, is that the questions are often, the answers are in a certain order. So with regards to this, what is frog spawn? It's probably going to be quite near the top of our text. And I'm going to look for a key word, and my key word is frog spawn. That means I don't need to read the whole text. I'm just going to look quickly through the text to find the word frog spawn. Or I'm going to look for the word frog and see if the rest of the word is spawn. So let's have a look. Frog, no spawn after that. Frog, nope, not after that. I'm going to keep going, keep going, keep going. Frog, spawn, okay. This is my key word that I was looking for. Let's have a read of the sentence. Frogs lay their eggs in water or wet places. A floating clump of eggs is called frog spawn. So I'd like you to write down on your piece of paper the answer of what is frog spawn. And we've got the answer from that sentence. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'd like you to write down what is frog spawn. And it's in that first 2 sentences. Okay, if you have written a floating clump of eggs, perfect. That is what frog spawn is. Or you can say it's the eggs that the frogs have laid and it's the clump of them all together. That's absolutely fine as well. Because in these 2 sentences, you would find the answer, a floating clump of eggs, and that is what frog spawn is. Okay, so that's our first question. Our second one, and remember, you can always tick your answers as you go, but really try to work out the answer before I tell you the answer. From the first section, find and copy a word that tells you that the eggs are together and not separate. Find and copy. Find and copy. That means if you write a word here that is not in the text, you won't get this mark. You have to copy it exactly. You can't spell it wrong either. So it says, from the first section, find and copy a word that tells you that the eggs are together and not separate. Let's have a look. The first section. I'm going to say that's the first sentence and this first paragraph here. So I'm going to look at both of these. I'm looking for a word that tells us that they are together, the eggs are together, not separate, like this picture here. Frogs lay their eggs in water or wet places. Remember, if you hear a word that tells you that they are together, I'd like you to write it down. A floating clump of eggs is called frog spawn. The large and slippery mass of eggs is too big to be eaten. This is nature's way of protecting them because smaller clumps of eggs may be eaten by ducks, fish, insects, and other water creatures. Hopefully you've written down a word there that means that they are together. Now there's 2 answers. You only need 1, but if you've written clump, you are correct. Clump. If it clumps together, it's all tightly packed together. It's a clump of it. It's like a bit like lump. It's a clump of it all together. If you have written mass, you can also have yourself a mark, so well done. A large slippery mass of eggs. That means a lot of them together, a mass of them together, a mass of eggs. If you wrote mass or clump, well done, you can give yourself a mark. Okay, let's go to the next question. Question 3. Why do eggs that are laid in a big ball have a better chance of growing into frogs? I'm going to say that again. Why do eggs that are laid in a big ball have a better chance of growing into frogs? Let's have another look. Now, I knew that this paragraph here told me about the mass and the clump of eggs, and that's what the question is about. So I'm going to read this first section again. The large and slippery mass of eggs is too big to be eaten. This is nature's way of protecting them, because smaller clumps of eggs may be eaten by ducks, fish, insects, and other water creatures. The egg begins as a single cell. Several thousand are sometimes laid at the same time. It soon becomes surrounded by a jelly-like covering which protects the egg. So the question, I'm going to go back to the question, why do eggs that are laid in a big ball have a better chance of growing into frogs? I'd like you to have a think. So have another read of that bit that I've just read for you. What is it that's protecting them? There's two answers here. You only need one answer. But what's protecting them? How are they able to grow into, how are they able to develop? What is it that's keeping them safe? Okay. So the answer is, first of all, one of the answers is that because it's in a big mass of eggs, like we said earlier, it was a big clump of eggs. It says here, if it was a small clump of egg, they could be eaten by ducks, fish, insects, or other water creatures. However, because it's in a big mass of eggs, it's too big to be eaten. So that's one way it keeps it, they all stay safe. They stay safe together. They're too big to be eaten. And another thing that protects it here is that over the cells, it has a jelly-like covering which protects the egg. However, the best answer is about it staying, if they stay together, it's too big to be eaten, because they'd still have a jelly-like covering even if they weren't as many together. So the best answer I'm looking for there is that they were tightly packed together, which protects them because smaller clumps of eggs could be eaten, but larger ones can't. Okay, let's have a look at the next question. Okay, we've got some tick boxes now for question 4 and 5. Choose the best heading for the first 3 paragraphs. Jelly babies, cells, frog spawn, or pond creatures. I'd like you to have a think. Jelly babies, cells, frog spawn, or pond creatures. Now, jelly babies is a type of sweet. Now, I understand why they said jelly babies, because they're like the babies of frogs, and they're all wrapped in jelly. Cells are the things that are growing inside the eggs. Frog spawn is what the whole thing is, or pond creatures. Now, it does mention pond creatures, it mentions water creatures, but that's only about what could eat the frog spawn. So I'd like you to think what these 3 sections, so the first 2 sentences here and this paragraph and this paragraph, what could the subheading be for that? Because this one's got a paragraph, a subheading. This paragraph has got a subheading. What is the subheading for this section here? Think what's most relevant. So the choices were jelly babies, cells, frog spawn, or pond creatures. Have another read of it if you need to. Which one is most relevant? I'll go back on, you can pause it now and have another read of it and choose your option. Okay. If you wrote frog spawn as your answer, fantastic. You can give yourself a tick. The reason it's not cells is because cells only mentioned in this section here. They're not mentioned in this section or this section. You want a subheading that is about all of that information. If you put cells, it's only about those 3 lines. Pond creatures, like I've just said, it's mentioned a little bit about water creatures here, but that's not what the whole paragraph is about. And it's also not about jelly babies, not about sweets, or necessarily all about the jelly that's covering the cells and the eggs. So frog spawn is what the whole thing is about. So if you wrote frog spawn, fantastic. Okay, let's have a look at our next one, which is also a tick box. The mass of cells in the egg is called an embryo. In this sentence, the word mass is closest in meaning to which option? Choose one. Now, we've done this before because we said what a mass was earlier on. The mass of cells in the egg is called an embryo. So the options for what the word mass means: is it a mess, there are lots of cells, there are not many cells, or there are lots of connected cells? So the cells are all together connected next to each other. Which one of those is what it means? I'm going to look for that sentence for you in the information. The mass of cells in the egg is called an embryo. So let's have a look and see if we can find that first. I'm going to look for the word mass. Mass of eggs. It's not that one there. So again, I'm not reading it, I'm just looking for the word mass to start with. Okay, the mass, here we go. The mass of cells in the egg is called an embryo. So it's in this section here, the mass of cells. So pause the video and have a read of that if you need to. And then have a think about which is your answer going to be. Is it the mess, which is a word that looks similar to mass because a letter missing? There are lots of cells, there are not many cells, or there are lots of connected cells. Pause the video and have a go at doing that question. Okay, if you wrote there are, or tick the box of there are lots of connected cells, well done. Now it's tricky because there are lots of cells and a mass of them is when there is a group of them though. That means they are all together, they're connected. So this one is the correct answer. You are very close if you wrote this because there are lots of cells together, but this is the answer. This will get you the mark. Okay, and the last question, it says the writer uses some less familiar words. Less familiar means just sort of trickier words that you may not have heard of, such as cell in paragraph 3 and embryo in paragraph 5. Why do you think the writer uses these words? Now, this answer is not going to be in the text. The word cell is in the text in paragraph 3 and embryo is in the text in paragraph 5. But the answer to this question isn't in the text. Why do you think the writer uses those words like cell and embryo in the text? I'd like you to have a think. I'd like you to write down your answer. Now, there isn't necessarily a correct answer here. I just want you to have a think about why would someone who is trying to teach people about frog spawn and frogs and cells and tadpoles, why would they use trickier words such as cell and embryo? Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer to this question. I'd like you to write it down. I will have a look at it on tapestry, or Mrs. Williams or Miss Gossage or Miss Amanpour or Mrs. Mercer will have a look at it on tapestry, and to mark to see what it says, your answer says. I really want you to have a think about why would someone who's trying to teach you about those things use tricky words like embryo and cell? Have a think of it. Now I'm going to leave it on this text for you to have a look through if you need to, and then we'll have a look at your answers. Now tomorrow you will need the next text. So these texts were sent out at the beginning of the week. So your next text, I believe, is also about frogs. It's going to be a bit more independent. So if you have a chance, read through that text before tomorrow's session, and then we'll go through the questions. But I'll leave you to work them out by yourself tomorrow. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing your answers.